Welcome to the introduction to Digital Anarchy's ToonIt photo plugin. I'm Jim Tierney, president of Digital Anarchy, and I'm going to talk about how ToonIt can easily turn your photos into cartoons. This video will discuss the basics of ToonIt and get you started cartooning your photos. So let's start off by applying ToonIt to our photograph. The human face is typically the most difficult thing to tune because we have so many expectations about what the features and expressions should look like. Preserving those details is what makes ToonIt so amazing. We're going to use a close-up of two women. ToonIt will do a fabulous treatment of their faces and of the smaller details like their hair, hands, and clothing. I've already opened up my image here in Photoshop. One thing you want to make sure of before you start tuning your own photo is that you have the layer selected in the layers palette. Now in this case I only have one layer, so it's not that big of a deal, but if I did have multiple layers, you would want to make sure that the layer that you want to apply ToonIt to is selected. And so now I'll go up to my filters menu here in Photoshop and go down to the Digital Anarchy submenu, and I'll find ToonIt there. And so we'll just click on ToonIt, and that will launch the ToonIt interface. So this shows all the different control sections of ToonIt. You can see that a cartoon effect is already applied to our image. ToonIt has three main parts to its interface, and they all work together to create this cartoon effect. The default look of ToonIt creates a flat, cel-shaded type of look, and black outlines are laid around the edges within the photo. So let's take a look at exactly how this was created. The effects palette over here is what you select different attributes to add on to the basic cartoon effect. There are groups of parameters that create effects like color fields, shadows, outlines, and each effect group has many different parameters to change its look and give you a lot of options to customize. Over here in the Style Creator section, this is where you're going to set up the look of the cartoon style. Each style sets the type of algorithm used by ToonIt to create the basis for the effect. And we'll go into more detail into this in just a moment. Now the last part of the interface that I want to point out is the preset manager. There's a whole bunch of different presets here, and these really give you a quick way of getting started with ToonIt. Each preset contains different settings for the effects palettes and the different tabs that are under there. It also contains settings for the Style Creator section, including which style is going to be used and what the parameters are set to. This is a great way to quickly try out a variety of different effects, see how they work, see what kind of settings create them, and very easily get interesting effects. And you can always go back to the original look just by hitting the reset button, which is just going to be slightly out of our view here, but you can trust me, that's right below where my cursor is. We can always click reset, and that will take us back to our original cartoon settings. Now one interesting thing that ToonIt does do is when you click OK, which is right below the ToonIt logo here, if you click OK and go back out to Photoshop, when you re-enter ToonIt, it's going to save the last settings you used. Now this is really great if you want to apply the same settings to a bunch of different photos. If you apply it to an image and you don't quite like the look of it, comes out a little bit off and you want to kind of retry it again, you can always undo the effect, go back into ToonIt, and it'll remember all the settings you last used instead of completely recreating the effect. Now let's make some changes to our cartoon. We're mostly going to fiddle around with the flatness and simplicity parameters here, and also look at the outlines parameters that are within the effects palette. Now one thing to point out about the preview window here is that it's better to zoom in to around 25, 33, or 50% because that's going to give you a better representation of what the final version will look like. In this case we're going to use 33%. And let's dive into making some changes. The concept of outlines is pretty easy to understand. If you click on the Use Comic option and then check it, you'll notice that the black lines disappear, leaving only the flat fields of color. Not having outlines gives the cartoon a totally different look and feel. The outlines really add to the quality of the details in the image. And without them there, it becomes a much more painterly type of feel, which you may like. But in this case, we're going for a cartoon look, so we really want to have those outlines on. And you'll notice that there's two other checkboxes here. The Use Soft, which creates a different type of outline, which we're not going to use in this tutorial, and Outline Only, which if we turn on our Use Comic again and turn on Outline Only, you'll see it gets rid of the fields of color completely and leaves us with really something that looks like a pen and ink type of drawing. And you can see that you can set the outline color as well as the background to create this effect. Now the first thing we can do is change the thickness value here. It sets the thickness of the major lines, mostly the ones that ToonIt feels set the depth and structure of the cartoon. If I change thickness to 6, you can see that the lines around the woman's neck and hair get much thicker, but the lines around her eyes stay pretty delicate. So let's change the thickness back to 3. Now the other key parameters here are your sensitivity and strength. And sensitivity basically kind of sets a threshold for the outlines. So as I increase this, you're going to start seeing a lot more of them. It's going to be a lot more sensitive to what edges it picks up and assigns an outline to. Usually around 60-ish is pretty good. Strength does something similar to thickness, and this usually translates into just being darker and thicker. But the difference between this and thickness is that strength really applies to every outline in the image. So even the softer, thinner outlines, when you crank up strength, will become much more pronounced. So all three of these kind of work in conjunction with each other. But for now, we're just going to set strength to around 60. And we're going to turn off Outline Only. Doing this immediately brings back those terrific color fields that we've hidden for a while. Now let's look at how we can change how our colors behave. We will do this in the effects palette with the flat shaded settings. To better see what is happening with our colors, let's uncheck Use Comic and turn the outlines off for the time being. So I click that and the outlines go away. Simplicity is what is causing all these color regions to appear. It controls the amount of color detail that is in the cartoon. If we change simplicity to 5, you can see that we are preserving a lot of the detail in the original image, which looks nice, but it makes the image look less cartoonish. As you can see, we have a lot more detail in the faces than we did with a high simplicity. You'll notice that there are fewer regions of color and less detail, making the image much more simplified and giving us that flat cartoon style. We can also change the flatness parameter. Flatness affects the smoothness of the transition between color fields. The higher the flatness is, the more the areas blend and the flatter the cartoon appears. If we set flatness to 20, you can see that this makes highlights and shadows stand out while reducing the overall image depth. And kind of hop between these two. And you can kind of see the difference that we're getting with the flatness values. Okay, so now let's click Use Comic option to turn our outlines back on. These lines give us some nice sharp edges in the women's faces while still preserving the subtleties of their expressions. That is very important when cartooning the human face and something that ToonIt really excels at. So now that you know the basics of ToonIt for Photoshop, let's click on OK, which is down here, which is a little bit off the screen, but we'll click on OK. And this will take us back into Photoshop, where ToonIt will render out the final image. So hopefully you've enjoyed this tutorial, and if you have, we have plenty more where this came from. Just go to our website at www.digitalanarchy.com. And the Digital Anarchy website has all sorts of tutorials and other information about ToonIt and our other products. And of course downloads of presets and other demo filters and all sorts of good stuff. So definitely go check out digitalanarchy.com, and thanks for joining me, and happy cartooning.